Chapter 241, A Cavernous Showdown. Raven's POV. That is a lot of noirs, scorch whistles in my mind, and their power is nothing to scoff at. I comment idly, mentally going over my stock of potions and tossing a couple of them to passing dawn guards. Isran stops barking orders for a moment and asks, "What can you see?" I focus harder on my sight and my lips thin slightly. Over 100 approaching at full speed, many of them respectably powerful. It would seem that we were expected. Isran immediately rounds on Serana, though he manages to keep himself from acting too aggressively. "Do you have something to do with this?" he asks grimly. Before Serana can deliver her probably scathing retort, Mephis interrupts with a giggle. "Ah, what sweet paranoia." She licks her lips. "Please do let it take over. I would love to see you humiliated." He grunts out a couple of rather unkind words, but thinks better of pressing the issue in our current situation, and instead looks at me, "Control your servants, Dagoth," and walks off toward his men. "Don't worry, she knows not to act up," I quip, earning myself a pout from Mephis. "Do you think Harkon suspects our involvement?" I ask Serana. She nods with a deep frown. Without a doubt, he is nowhere near as foolish enough to miss my betrayal by now. "Unsurprising," I sigh. "One does not live as long as he did by being an idiot." For all his pride, he knows not to draw attention or act without caution. Serana agrees with a mix of irritation and firmly ingrained fear. "Any idea on who he might have sent?" I ask as I position my shades around the entrance while summoning several Dwemer crossbow spheres alongside Gatecrasher and commanding them to take the high ground where possible. Mephis had already disappeared alongside Dexion. Best make sure that the reason we were even here didn't get chopped up in the fighting. She spends a brief moment thinking about Fura Bloodmouth. She says with quite a bit of certainty, his prized bloodhound and a rather powerful warrior. Thankfully, she has no care for anything except fighting, but that also makes her especially dangerous in close quarters. "Great, another ridiculously fast beast," I groan. "Why can't it be a mage? I haven't had a proper duel in ages." "Careful what you wish for, Pops." It took them only a minute to close in and notice the scattered corpses and vampire ash, at which point they sped up and barged into the cave, completely uncaring about more traps and other hazards. "Well, she did say Harkon's servant was a bloodhound." I shrug lazily and toss what remained of a cigar. A moment later, a figure wearing red Volkihar-styled plate armor and wielding a massive moonstone axe rushes into the chamber, more vampires following after her, and a figure clad in black and gold robes slinking in behind them. "The fucking Thalmor," I grouse, and focus all of my sight on the extra baggage. "Sheesh, that is a lot of magicka." Scorch whistles. Just as she is about to wordlessly attack, Fura notices Serana and stops in her tracks, her servants following suit. "Lady Serana," the bloodhound greets as politely as a beast can, "your father has invited you back home." "And you can shove that invitation down his throat," Serana retorts without even looking at her, though from the slight twitch in her hand, I could tell the response took a lot of courage. "I am afraid that wasn't a request. I was told to bring you in. You don't need your legs for that." Fura smiles gleefully, her eyes snapping to me and then to her Thalmor companion. "Mortal, deal with the mage." "You do not command me, beast." A very pleasant female voice retorts with all the disdain one might expect from Thalmor nobility. "Yet you will do so anyways." Fura offers her a bloodthirsty grin and looks back to me, a slight brush against my mind that I easily shrug off, telling me just how uncaring she was about anything other than battle. "Where is the priest?" she asks, likely only to get it off her list. "Dead," I respond with the full force of Mephalah's blessing, causing the vampire to pause in frustration. "Can you deal with the bloodhound?" I quietly ask Serana. Her response is filled with a surprising amount of excitement and an understandable amount of bloodthirst. "Oh, you can leave her to me." I nod and flick my hand, the staff of Magnus materializing and immediately drawing a covetous stare from the shrouded Thalmor. "Well then, dear guests," I raise my free hand invitingly, "shall we?" They do not get the time to answer as Gatecrasher launches an explosive bolt straight into their loose formation. The discharge of blinding crimson light followed by dozens of crossbows firing. Many of the vampires in my line of sight managed to evade the attack. But that was just part of my plan, as over a dozen of the poor idiots find themselves standing in front of me, just as I take in a deep breath, and shout, "Yol!" Selan, Dawnguard veteran POV. Torshu! The cave shakes as dragonfire engulfs the central chamber, sending most of the lucky vampires running into the side paths and straight into our sight. Take them down! I order my squad as we loose bolt after bolt from our repeating crossbows, the silver ammunition working wonders against the filthy creatures. A couple noticed our position and started rushing us, but Tingvar managed to toss a firebomb in their path, blocking them off long enough for us to cut them down. Reloading. Another of my brother's voices, and we move in to cover him. More and more vampires shielded by a pack of deathhounds start advancing on our position, only our enchanted shields protecting us from the ice shards they threw our way. It did not take me long to realize that our position would not hold, as our ammo was limited, and we could not reach the steel spheres in time to resupply, and just as the last of our bolts was spent, and the vampires were about to fall upon us and cut us down, the nearby shadows shimmered like a wave, spouting forth warriors, seemingly made of darkness, and holding back the vampires just long enough for us to retreat to another position. What the fuck are those things? One of the less experienced among us barks, panic clear in his voice. Flame Tongue's conjurations, now keep moving. Drac, the massive orc in our unit, shoves him forward, an immense explosion of golden fire behind us, stopping any further debate as all of us hauled with all our strength. Isran's POV. Another rabid beast lunges at me, believing it can ignore my hammer. I prove it wrong by crushing its head and turning it into ash. A prayer to Stendar on my mind as I channel even more magicka into my suncloak. Bolts and scroll-bound spells pepper the area around me, my men not yet being ready to face a vampire in melee combat. The fact made clear by the bisected young man laying to my right, his armor only slowing his death long enough for him to realize something was off. More beasts attempt to climb the platform we were protecting, the massive dwarf ballista not allowing any of them to join the ruinous battle in the main chamber. The thought made me glance downwards and immediately focus back on what was in front of me. As if they would survive a single second down there, I suppress an involuntary shiver. I feel a slight tug at my stamina, a beast attempting to drain my life force, no doubt. It takes me only a glance to follow the red shimmer of the spell to see where it was hiding, and I lob a firebomb at its position. The short bout of screaming that followed brought a smile to my face. The telltale sound of ice magic draws my eyes to my right just as a massive spike of ice lodges itself into the eye-hole of another of my subordinates. Rage simmers in my heart at the death of another brave man as I harden my grip on my hammer and charge at the beasts, the three previously demoralized survivors quickly remembering their duty and showering the undead with even more bolts. As the rabid beasts fell to my strikes one after another, my resolution grew. We could do this. Serana's POV. My mind is perfectly clear as I duck and evade another swing of Fura's axe, immediately showering the bloodthirsty maniac with overcharged sparks and forcing her back. The clarity of mind which followed me ever since I was unbound from Molag Bal was at first disorienting. The hole in both mind and personality I experienced left me feeling without purpose or drive. Yet with each day I spent among those full of life and hope, I felt as if my soul itself was slowly knitting itself back together. I no longer felt my blood boil as it once did, my bestial instincts honed by an unclouded mind allowing me to easily evade and redirect the now all too slow attacks of my father's pet. Each of her failed attacks earning her a gash she was forced to heal with her dwindling life force. Our clash continued, only stopped briefly when we both had to dodge stray spells coming from the magical duel happening nearby. The golden flames of Raven and his bird being potent enough to harm even us. Claws and lightning clashed with steel as our battle continued, Fura growing more and more bloodied with every exchange, yet her bloody smile widening every time she was hurt. No matter, she may be crazy and even enjoy the pains of battle, but I would crush her like so many others. Naturally, the world had to prove me wrong almost immediately as I felt said. Life force suddenly swell and rush into Fura's hands, her axe lashing out and striking my stomach with the force of a giant, my spine breaking like a twig. The now starving Fura jumped atop me, barely leashing her desire to claw out my throat. She went for my hands, attempting to rip them off and stop me from fighting back. Yet even with all the pain, I was not panicked, nor did I fear defeat, for my mind was overwhelmed with an all-encompassing need, something that all other vampires found outright revolting. I needed to bite the life out of her, and so I did. Before she could even blink, my fangs pierced her throat, and the disgusting blood of Molag flowed down my throat, tasting of the sweetest nectar. My wounds healed in seconds, my spine connecting with a dull snap. I stood up, my mind clearer than ever, and my veins bursting with power. Raven's POV, start of the fight. My throat burns only slightly as I force the hangers-on apart from their leaders, Serana wasting no time in lunging at Fura and drawing her away from the Thalmor and myself. Now that the mooks are gone, care to introduce yourself? I ask with fake politeness, my words suffused with Mephala blessing. The Thalmor studies me for a moment before smiling slightly. But of course, those of power should be respectful even as enemies. Yeah, right, Scorch rolls his eyes from his seat atop my shoulder. I am Lady Nerys, she proclaims proudly, a beautifully crafted staff of moonstone materializing into her hand. And you are Lord Dagoth. She smiles challengingly, a rather large thorn in our side. What an honor, I quip with false cheer. An entire empire feels threatened by little old me. There is no need to be crass, she tuts. One of your power should hold themselves to a higher standard. What is this? An etiquette lesson from an Ultima purist? I visibly roll my eyes, irritating the prim and proper lady more than I expected. Magic is a sacred thing, she insists. One who wields its might should not debase themselves. Magic is power, I drawl, and in the end that is all that matters. As I speak, I send a mental nudge toward my rings, the mountain of magicka contained within coming to the fore and causing the entire cave to shudder. Much to my pleasant surprise, Nerys doesn't back down. Then might will prove my words true. She flicks her hand and summons a dozen aurorans, spell circles already forming all around her. My eyes narrow at the presence of Meridia's Dremora, all levity leaving me as I summon my sword and growl, my voice tinged with the thume, I am going to fuck you up now. She takes an instinctual step back, immediately stopping herself and frowning deeply at her own actions. And just like that, all of her previous politeness disappears as she lets out a furious shriek, dozens of spells flying in my direction. Chapter 242, Moving Forward. With a lazy flick of my staff, the barrage of blinding lightning bolts redirects away from me and gouges the stone of the cave behind me. Is that it? I ask with feigned disappointment, intending to rile her up. All of that bluster and this is all you offer? The Thalmor mage scoffs, petty mockery. Is that all the great Master Raven can do? More runic circles form in front of her as her conjured bodyguards create a loose shield wall. Archmage, actually. I smirk and swing my staff forward, summoning a great fireball and directing it at the Ultima, while multiple spikes emerge from the ground, impaling some of the aurorans and aiming to impale her as well. Her eyes narrow as she forces the earth spikes away and summons some kind of rapidly revolving ward around herself, disrupting the fireball and making it harmlessly blow over the aurorans, petty titles of even pettier peoples. Another, far more focused lightning bolt blasts for my head. Instead of blocking it, I simply tilt my head a split second before the spell is complete, letting it pass by harmlessly while only barely touching my robe's defenses. As I do so, I point the staff of Magnus at her chest and direct its destructive powers into a beam of pure magicka capable of ignoring all magical defenses. Two aurorans immediately form a line in front of her, getting banished for their efforts and earning Nerys just enough time to step out of the way and respond with another barrage of spells, this time launching curved firebolts to attack me from every direction. Taking a single step forward and lurching toward the shadow of one of Meridia's Dremora, I appear behind the gold-armored figure and immediately lash out with blasphemy. the barest touch making the creature scream out in pain and banish itself voluntarily. The same thing happens 2 more times before the Thalmor starts to predict me, and I am forced to focus back on her spells while Scorch harasses what little Aurorans were left. The cave shudders as we continue our clash of magic. The indiscriminate detonations caused by lightning and fire all around us no doubt ending more than a few of the numerous Volkihar forces and their pets. Beams of pure magicka shear through the natural pillars of the cave, collapsing it on my enemies while flames block off approaches to my allies, even as I still battle my opponent. With each blast of magic, the near-manic grin on my face becomes wider, the pleasant bubbling in my veins finally coming back after so many instances of being forced into a pure melee fight, to the point of discarding my sword as the last Auroran falls and I start throwing more and more outlandish combinations of the elements at my opponent. And to my great delight, she responds in kind as her wards become more and more complex and her attacks more unpredictable. The simple standoff turning into a rapid series of blinks, shadow walks and attacks, the intensity of our spells increasing with each and every moment. It gets so wild and destructive that we are both forced to use Terramancy to rise supports just so we don't get buried alive, and all that while still attempting to defeat each other. Soon the entire chamber heats up to the point of being painful to anyone who wasn't Dunmer, and I notice the bloodied but intact Serana jump away, her interference better suited to helping the dwindling Dawn Guard than adding even more destruction to our duel. As I shatter yet another lance of ice, I take a step back, my opponent seemingly also taking the opportunity to re-strategize. "You are stronger than I expected," I say, my tone genuinely jovial. "And you are far more powerful than the report said." There is a hint of frustration in her tone, but it is overshadowed by begrudging respect. "Good old Elenwen playing with the paperwork, eh?" I grin, no doubt to hide her incompetence. How is the good ambassador these days, by the way? There is vindictive amusement in Nerys's eyes, stressed by her duties. "A shame," I drawl, though one has to wonder, why would they send just you? "Just me?" Her eyes narrow slightly. "I assure you, I am more than enough." "So you say, but hear me out here. Counterpoint." I raise a hand and snap my fingers, causing every single automaton still standing, and as one they aim at every possible point of teleportation and fire. Nerys immediately starts attempting to dodge the bolts, but her actions quickly prove futile, and she is forced to use telekinesis to hold a couple of them back. The split-second pause in her movements gives Scorch just enough time to emerge from the nearby ceiling and land on her head, cutting her up and causing her to screech in panic. A blast of lightning exploding all around her and sending the bird boy flying away. Completely ignoring the unfocused attack and tanking it with my robes, I dash through the magical explosion and swing my staff, the glaive instead of the stick, and deliver an ebon flesh-enhanced strike to her own staff, shattering it in the process and sending her tumbling to the ground, the artifact's detonation only making me skid back slightly. Before she can get up or gather her focus, I place my foot on her stomach, eliciting a pained squawk, and point the tip of my glaive at her throat. "Since you've been such a good sport, I am going to be generous, despite your earlier insult, and offer you the chance to surrender." It takes her a bit to refocus, but the moment she does, her eyes actually glow with indignation, her uninjured hand moving about in an attempt to cast a spell, and I allow her to do so. The expression of dumbfounded surprise on her face when she realizes that she cannot teleport away made me let out a snicker of amusement. "You really should have read your reports better, my Lady Nerys," I mock. "For all my prowess in combat, I am and always will be, first and foremost, an enchanter." She takes a moment to look around, but the further she looks, the more her despair grows, as she realizes that each and every spot I had ever stood on now held a rune meant to stop spatial disturbances, something which, funnily enough, didn't work on shadow movement. With a resigned exhale, she lifts her unmangled hand in surrender, and I immediately slap an enchanted bracelet on it, causing all the magic within the Altmer to still completely and an expression of pure despair to appear on said elf's face. "That will teach you to be cheeky and summon Meridia's little shits. Those vampires not yet cut down or turned into dusty pincushions quickly found themselves on a one-way trip to visit their patron, as both Serana and I fell upon them with all our might. Scorch took particular delight in chasing down the couple of the wiser bloodsuckers when they tried to escape. He was in fact still playing around with an old man vampire and taunting him into throwing himself into the slaughterfish-infested marshlands. What an asshole! I snort and turn back to the rest. "Are you well, Moth Priest?" I ask the pale Dexian. "I am. My thanks for your prompt intervention, Court Mage." He winces slightly, and my apologies for my earlier crassness. My internment has not been kind. A perfectly understandable reaction, I assure him. You were here for rumors of an Elder Scroll, I believe. He nods eagerly. Do you mean to say you know of their location? I am in the direct possession of one and indirect of another. I answer lazily. I trust that you will not mind reading them for us when we are ready. He takes a moment to consider the specifics of my words, but still eagerly agrees. Of course, Court Mage. It is my life's purpose. Excellent. I clap my hands and then grimace slightly. Your guards. All the joviality leaves Dexian as looks away and says nothing. I nod and look to Isran. Casualties? 5 slain and 2 dismembered but alive. The now helmetless Red Guard grunts harshly, but I sense his sorrow at the fact. Those who can be healed will be, I promise, immediately, much to the man's hidden relief. We did not expect such numbers. Your men surviving it at all is an achievement in and of itself. I praise genuinely. It is their job, Isran grinds out, but I am sure they will appreciate it. Now that you have patted yourselves on the back, can we get moving? Mephis interjects playfully. Our newest guest is getting uppity. She taps the head of the gagged Altmer, now dressed in plain robes, sitting to her side and attempting to glare a hole in her face. Isran just grunts and grabs the potions I summoned from my inventory before going to heal his men. Serana tilts her head slightly. Are you sure you should leave her alive? The deadpan casualness of the question makes Nerys' eyes widen in fear. I shrug. We will find some use to her. She is obviously not one of the brainwashed fools in her order, so she should have some valuable information at the very least. If you think so, Serana hums uncaringly. Considering they sent her alone with my father's dog, I don't think she is all that important. Cue indignant, gagged grunts and hisses. Or maybe it was just youthful overconfidence, I quip. Nerys did look very young for a mage of her power, even if she was Altmer. Serana raises an amused eyebrow as said Altmer looks down in shame. You might be right. A sudden flash of information enters my mind, and I straighten up. Scorch is done with the cleanup. We can get moving, and hopefully get done with dealing with Morthal today. My lips twist into something approaching disgust. Their resilience is impressive, but I could do without the smell and fumes. Even the Thalmor joined in the disgusted sniffs that followed. We wasted no time in dealing with Idgrod's household. I walked in, told them the vampires were done and the priest rescued, and left them to deal with the ensuing celebration without waiting for any kind of response. The poor steward forgot to breathe for the whole minute I was there. Was it rude? Indubitably. Could Hjalmarch afford to get pissy with me because I hightailed it out of their swamp? No. And so it was that after telling Isran to prepare for an increase of vampiric activity across the board, that I teleported my entire group back to Winterhold and into the pleasant chill of my home. Excellent job as always, Carsus. I nod and dismiss my steward. As he leaves my study, I start playing with tiny sparks of lightning and fire between my fingers. Today's confrontation, while not incredibly dangerous in and of itself, reminded me of what I actually enjoyed since coming to Tamriel. It would seem that in my worry for the future, I have allowed the court mage to replace the simple mage, and more importantly, the adventurer. The whole source behind my power and motivation. It was a minor reminder, something that I would have no doubt overlooked without prior experience, but the signs were there, and I would not ignore them or dismiss them just so I could descend into ruinous routine again. I came here to have a fulfilling life, and not even the damn apocalypse would stop me. Very dramatic pops, Scorch drawls, his eyes burning with feigned mockery. Fuck right off, I flip him the bird. You know damn well we have been drudging along ever since the King's Moot. Ironically, I can't even allow myself to mention the actual event aloud. We have Scorch, for once in his life, nods seriously. But you also know we needed to go through it step by step. Moving on never gets easier. I sigh and recline back into my seat, staring at the ceiling contemplatively. Fucking Meridia. I mutter and feel a slight tug of support from another creature of oblivion. Manipulative as ever, I grouse, though I make sure the thought doesn't reach her. A long silent moment passes before Scorch speaks again. So what now? He asks the truly important question. Now, I mutter, allowing my emotions to settle as I look at the picture hanging off my wall, both a gift and a reminder. Now we finally move forward. Chapter 243, Conference. After spending the remainder of the evening reminiscing about the past and pondering the future, constant blabbering from the asshole bird included, I found my mood far less dour when morning came. Sleep was a thing that I only had to do occasionally at this point, and with each excursion and the subsequent growth in power, it was turning from a necessity to a simple luxury. In fact, my recent battles and victories against the supernaturally fast and strong have had a rather profound effect on my growth. Stravaten 29 to 33, Dex 30 to 35, Vit 46 to 50, Mag 1020 to 1080. My strength and dexterity have reached such a point that if not for the difference in skill and experience, I could probably overpower and outmaneuver a circle companion in pure magicless melee, the non-transformation boost they got from being a furry included. The real kicker, however, was the vitality. My combat style was not truly conducive to me taking any kind of damage, since I tended to simply avoid it instead of taking it in the face, like a complete dumbass. But if I were ever to say get clobbered by a giant, I would be able to walk it off with only slight bruising, while naked. A curious part of me wanted to test it out, but I squashed that before it had time to tempt me further. There was an aspect of it all that I generally avoided until now, something I hated thinking about when I was still a mere man, as it reminded me of the fact that I was born with an expiration date, and it was never a time frame I found encouraging. The knowledge I could do absolutely nothing about the fact that I would simply stop functioning at one point was something that ironically made the fact I had lived so long so unbearable. Lifespan, a vague timer nature gave us, and a source of much dread for many, something I avoided thinking about even if I was granted a far greater one due to being an elf and descended from a semi-divine being simply due to the bad memories it carried. Last night I finally forced myself to forget my old fears and frustrations and spent a good hour scanning every facet of my being and taking precise measurements. What I found was both surprising and expected in equal measure. The constant trickle of magicka, combined with my kind blessed vitality and bloodline, would allow me to keep living for 2,000 years at least. And that was without considering how powerful I would become in the future. Compared to that, my previous life might as well be just a tiny blip on the proverbial radar. The self-imposed revelation lifted a weight from my shoulders I did not know I felt until it was gone. Suddenly I felt as if I had all the time in the world. And the moment the feeling struck me was the moment I got up from the chair and started moving toward Dexian's chambers. There was no way in hell I was about to allow myself to grow complacent just because I could live damn near forever. That was a pitfall I would not allow myself to ever stumble into. As I knocked on the ornate wooden door, I could immediately hear panicked stumbling from the other side and was forced to suppress a loud snicker as I watched Dexian roll off his bed and fall face first on the floor. The door guard gave me a confused look as I was choking down my laughter and sensing the opportunity for a distraction. I quietly asked him, "Anything unusual?" The youthful Dunmer, a quarter refugee if memory serves, gave the door a somewhat nervous glance and whispered back, mumbling and pained grunting in his sleep, "Nightmares no doubt, seeing as you've checked on his health yourself, my lord." "Most likely," I nod and add, "Still, in the future, if a guest sounds pained, do check on them just in case." "As you command," the elf salutes. About a minute of attempting and utterly failing to look presentable, Dexian opens the door, a big bruise on his forehead and dark circles under his eyes. He blinks the sleep out of his eyes and greets me, "A fair morning to you, Lord Dagoth. Please pardon my current state. My ordeal with the vampires has not yet worn off, I am afraid. And it likely won't for a while yet, I am sorry to say." I offer a sympathetic smile while flicking a restoration spell and healing his bruise and summoning a potion of stamina, something he took eagerly the moment it appeared. I hum lightly as he chugs down the potion. If it is no trouble, I ask that you make your way to the library. Once you are ready, the guard will show you the way. All the tiredness disappears as his entire posture takes in an air of excitement. Are you going to show me the scrolls? Indeed. I nod and his face brightens like that of a child. Though you will only be looking today, some other preparations will be necessary before the reading. He deflates slightly but still eagerly nods. I will be there as soon as possible, and swiftly closes the door. As you were, I chuckle at the amused guard and go to fetch the rest of my people. Within the hour, I find myself standing in the library surrounded by a seated crowd consisting of Davos, Serana, the Falmer and Dexion. The priest barely paying any attention to what the rest were talking about as he spent the entire time staring at the immaculate scroll case in Serana's lap. Luckily for him, she found it more entertaining than offensive. A short while of wordless staring later, Dexion turns to me. You said there were 2 scrolls. I did. I nod and point to a pair of empty chairs. The other one should be coming in. I feel a shudder in my wards and allow the spell to go through, just about now actually. With a loud pop, Savos and Shalazar appear seated in the 2 chairs, the Archmage giving me a wave while the tiny Argonian cradles a very familiar metal scroll case, which was comically just as large as him. Savos, Shalazar, meet Dexion the Moth Priest. I quickly introduce them. For a moment I think that the old Imperial was going to ignore them in favor of the scroll, but he very obviously forces himself to look up from the magic scribble and bows his head slightly, an honor to meet such mighty figures. Indeed, Shalazar nods imperiously. Being the more diplomatic of the 2, Savos smiles. The college is honored to aid our brothers from the White Gold Tower. I clap my hands, drawing everyone's attention. Now that introductions are over, I believe it is time we address the reason I have called you all here. Enlighten those who cannot see, O student mine, Shalazar squeaks commandingly, and I do as the Great One commands. As many of you are aware, this set of scrolls are instrumental in dealing with the current vampiric threat. I look to my right hand. Mer Davos, if you would? Of course. He nods and pulls out a folded scroll and starts reading it. Since last month, there have been vampire attack in many settlements, both major and minor. Notably, Whiterun, Riverwood, Falkreath, Markarth, Solitude, Morthal, and most alarmingly Riften and Fort Dawnguard to its southeast. Which is to say that their operations have expanded from merely Harfingar to near half the damn province. I finish for him, and this will no doubt grow further out of control as time passes. I briefly pause for dramatics. Thus, we must deal with the Volkihar clan and their apparent alliance with the Thalmor before the situation becomes impossible to deal with. And the scrolls are supposed to help with that, Dexion asks eagerly. 2 entire scrolls, a momentous event by all accounts. 3, I correct, startling the man and causing Serana to frown deeply. 3? Dexion squawks, but quickly composes himself. Is this why you wish to delay the reading? Indeed, I nod. Even with extra preparation, I cannot rely on your sight surviving the ordeal of reading the 2. So we must make the most of it. Dexion nods understandingly while caressing his grey beard. A moment later he looks back at me, a glint of intelligence that was not there previously in his eyes. And you have some idea of what the scrolls contain? Indeed, I nod and plainly state, the location of Auriel's bow. Those not yet informed reach just as one might expect, and the room is filled with muttering, mumbling, exclamations of surprise, or more subdued curiosity in the case of the Magi. A most sacred task, Dexion mutters resolutely. I will naturally gladly read the scrolls in service of this righteous cause. And we are honored by your sacrifice, I bow slightly, though I believe it is time to mention those preparations I've talked about earlier. He perks up. Oh, do you have some hidden way of reducing the strain? Not hidden, I shake my head. There is an ancestor glade in southern Falkreath. An ancestor glade, Dexion mumbles, while still scratching his beard. Yes, that could work, he exclaims excitedly. which is why you will be leaving there with Nightshade, Alor, and a force of my warriors. I look to the farmer. Nightshade will lead the operation, but the expertise of a moth priest is to also be taken into account when dealing with the glade. The petite snow elf bows, by your will, her subordinate following suit. And now for the uncomfortable part. My lips twist as I feel nervous for the first time in a very long time, the final scroll. I draw the words out. We are in possession of the scroll of dragons and that of blood, and all that is left is the scroll of the sun. I give Serana a pointed look. She reclines in her chair and sighs, which is in the possession of my mother. Lady Valerica, I test the name wife of Lord Harkon, and the reason why his plans have failed so far. A couple of surprised eyebrows raise at that. Oh, and also a daughter of Cold Harbor. What is it with this family? I hear Savos mutter and suppress a snicker. You plan on recruiting her, boss? Davos cuts in before anyone can ask a million questions, already firmly understanding of my modus operandi. If she had the foresight to prevent Harkon's idiocy, then she is obviously far more reasonable than most of those sharing her affliction. I give Serana an apologetic look at the term, but she doesn't seem to mind. Recruiting her will be a massive boon if Serana's skills and power are any indication, and her help in taking down her husband would be invaluable. A valid point, Savos interjects. I have read a couple of ancient works on conjuration, specifically on necromancy, penned by the esteemed lady. The college would be glad to host her. Needless to say, the unsaid, she would also be protected, was clear to all. And she would no doubt be delighted to visit, Serana offers diplomatically, which only leaves the hard part of finding her. She trails off. Oh, I believe you know exactly where she is hiding, I say ominously. Serana blinks and then blanches. Oh no. Oh yes. My smile spreads into a grin. Where else would she hide from Harkon than right under his nose? And you want us to go there and get her? Serana palms her face in defeat. Ah, but just think about it. I spread my arms dramatically. We sneak into Castle Volkihar, grab Valerica, and then let Harkon know just how foolish he was while escaping. It will be glorious. For a moment she looks at me exasperated, but then she registers my words, and I finally see where all that fear she held for her father went, as her eyes practically gleam with vicious intent. A visit home doesn't sound so bad after all. Chapter 244, The Shroud. We spent a few more hours debating the details of the upcoming operation, with Savos pointedly asking me about each and every protection I had against everything the Volkihar could try doing to me. It would have been endearing if it didn't remind me of the protection jokes my parents constantly made so long ago, but I still thanked the old elf for his concern when he finally stopped. Still, it isn't like he was wrong. Where I was going, I would definitely need a way to protect myself, my soul specifically, and the enchanting session that awaited me filled me with both dread and excitement, because if I didn't manage to do it myself, I would have to ask for Daedric assistance, and that was a terrible bloody idea, no matter how close I was to my patron. As most of my guests, vassals, shuffled out of the library, I spoke up. Serana, a moment if you do not mind. She seemed a bit startled by my request, but stayed anyway, and as Shalazar proclaimed his glorious exit and popped back to the college, thus leaving us alone, she asked, "What do you need?" A certain event has caught my curiosity. I begin slowly as she gives me her attention. When you were fighting Fura, I noticed you doing something rather unusual. I drank her blood, Serana deadpans. I nod. Exactly, and pardon my lack of knowledge, but vampires are known to react rather violently to such attempts. And yet I did not, she finishes for me. Quite, I offer a pleased smile. You can plainly see why that would make me curious. What does it matter to you anyway? She asks defensively. Mere curiosity, and a possible avenue of research if you are willing. I shrug. If you are not, then I naturally leave you to your secrets. She stares at me silently for a while, and just as I am about to accept that she is unwilling to talk about it, she finally speaks. When I drained her fully. An important part of it, no doubt, a part of her power was subsumed into my own blood. I thought it was temporary at first, but it hasn't diminished even slightly since then. I scratch my chin. It would seem that your liberation has had a couple of unsuspected effects. Did you notice any additional side effects? She looks away for a moment. Ever since then, I have felt an urge to battle and hunt. Some of my thoughts were almost eerily similar to what Führer used to say. Were? I latch onto the word. She nods. The effect has been diminishing slowly. It is still there, but it will fade within a day or two at this pace. And you did say she was rather powerful, even if focused exclusively on physical power. I hum thoughtfully. Do you think you can do this again? Yes. There is no doubt in her voice as she answers, the hole left by him when you set my soul free has been slightly filled when I consumed. She winces, Führer, and my very being demands that I see it till the end. Could it be some kind of ploy by Molag to see you tethered once more? I ask simply because the whole thing sounded too convenient. If she were physically capable, she would have no doubt paled upon hearing me. She did jerk away violently, though, and stared at me, looking just about ready to have a panic attack. Sword. She practically orders. Who am I to deny such a polite request? With a flick of my hand, blasphemy finds itself pointed at her core, and she immediately grabs the blunt side. When absolutely nothing happens for an entire silent minute, she lets out a deep sigh of relief and falls limply into a nearby chair while palming her forehead, following the instinct to wipe the sweat that wasn't there. Did you really need to do that? She asks with a mix of exasperation and relief. One can never be too sure. I shrug, but I do apologize for scaring you. She waves me off, all previous decorum forgotten in the face of existential dread. It is fine. You were looking out for me in the first place. That I was. I say genuinely, I will leave you to your rest now. There are a bunch of things I need to get done before we move out. We will reconvene in the evening and finish planning things out before moving out. She just waves wordlessly and grabs a nearby book, a tome on sun magic, ironically enough. An incredibly thin shroud as dark as the void itself and covered in barely perceptible purple magnesite runes lies at the enchanting table in front of me. It is so light that I barely even feel it when I touch it, and it is so large it can cover me even when I am in full combat gear. I have spent an immense amount of money getting the resources for making this item, made from the silks of specific spiders in both Morrowind and Black Marsh, and imbued by umbral energies for a prolonged period of time. The Telvanni Magister that sold it to me was known to experiment with materials like this, and knew that he was likely the only provider, so the price he asked was a sum well into the upper six figures. A price I paid gladly for the safety of my soul. Just as I was about to begin the enchantment process, I felt Mephis materialize beside me, a curious look in her eyes. Keeping busy, I see, she says in lieu of greeting. I am, I confirm easily while checking on the runic matrix one last time. The coming fight will be neither easy nor safe. She hums and takes a deeper look at the shroud, her eyes drifting across the scribbles with visible curiosity. Oh my. She covers her mouth in mock surprise. You are going a bit deeper than merely sneaking into the castle. Yes, I sigh, completely unsurprised that she could connect the dots. Some things just need doing, and this is one of them. You could just ask, you know, she says with a surprising seriousness. I could. I agree once again without turning around. But that would make me reliant on you, and that is not something I find palatable. And you are not already? She asks rhetorically, though she makes sure it doesn't sound too demeaning. You use both your position and my worshippers for your ends, and now a projection of myself. Is that not reliance? A rather unexpected tonal shift from you. I turn around with a raised eyebrow, completely unbothered by the turn of events. Why the sudden interest? She giggles. Maybe my poor maiden heart is shaken by your constant mistrust. Maiden? I deadpan. Well, this one is. She winks. I turn back to the shroud and start retracing the runes once again, just so I can keep busy and let my thoughts settle. I have no doubt that you have me exactly where you want me. I concede easily. You are a being older than the world itself, and attempting to go around your schemes is no doubt just another one of them. A webweaver through and through indeed. I do not need to look at her to feel the hungry gaze on my back. Do praise me more. She purrs. I roll my eyes and sigh. Must you do this every time? Yes. Of course, I deadpan, back to my point. I turn and give her a pointed stare. I can accept being partly entangled in your proverbial web. Proverbial. She raises an eyebrow almost challengingly. Yes. I nod without hesitation, eliciting an amused smile from her. But if the web becomes too tight, I will not hesitate to burn it. How very defiant. She tuts, and in the next instant her eyes narrow hungrily. And how tempting. You can look but not touch, I point at her, eliciting another mildly disturbing giggle. My point is. I give her a pointed stare so she doesn't interrupt me with more of her perversions, and to my surprise, she accepts with only a pout. This shroud is meant to guard my soul, and you know damn well I am not about to let anyone, not even you, touch it. Not even me, she quotes. How flattering. I try. I snark, much to her delight. I am going to enchant it now. You can watch from a distance, but kindly do not ruin what little trust I have for you with a childish joke. I may have said it as a request, but the moment the words leave my mouth, her body moves out of the way and blocks any energy from within her, rendering her completely powerless, or at least her puppet body. I do my very best to ignore the disturbing heavy breathing that follows. Finally, certain of not being further disturbed, I pull out Azura's star, the ancient soul gem brimming with so much soul energy I could probably power the white gold tower's defenses for a good century, and without so much as a blink, I direct the entirety of it toward the barely visible shroud on my table. Hours pass. The shroud hungrily consumes the energy from the star, gorging itself on more and more until barely anything is left, and even then the silken monstrosity demands more. So still unwilling to taint my creation with Daedric power, I summon the staff of Magnus and with a mental flick connect myself with his eye. The endless torrent of pure magicka slams itself into the enchantment, suffusing it fully with its power and making the runes upon it glow with its familiar light. My trepidation grows with each second that passes. A small part of me afraid of what I would have to sacrifice for this. But to my relief, the moment I count 5, the enchantment clicks into place and sends a shudder of power through the room, shaking up many of the implements within, but doing to actual damage as I was prepared for something like this. A moment later, the shroud disappears and reforms over me, perfectly covering my form and making me look just like a darkened silhouette. The lightest gasp awakens me from the revelry of my success as I hear the sound of genuine surprise coming from the Daedra. I cannot see you, she mutters, genuinely astonished. Obviously, she was referring to her metaphysical senses as she can still observe me with her eyes. I turn around and spread my arms grandly. Understand now. I do indeed. She smiles, the hunger she showed previously a far more subdued yet present affair. I should not be surprised at this point, but you somehow managed to do it again. She praises, very well, I will admit my defeat this time. She inclines her head ever so slightly, do enjoy yourself, and disappears. Thought Scorch scoffs mentally. Quite. I snort and analyze the fruits of my labor. Mind 53 to 57. Mag 1080 to 1130. The Shroud of Raven, an item not meant for mortal hands, yet one made by them, none may observe the bearer against their will while they are covered in its silken grasp. Self-repairing, soul-bound, intangible, eternal. Light Eater. The shroud will consume anything that might make the bearer noticeable, whether it be light or sound, in such a way as to make physically detecting the bearer near impossible. Hallowed seclusion. Any kind of metaphysical sense is blocked completely. From mere magic sight to conceptual detection, not even death itself will find the bearer while hidden under the shroud. Soul Shroud. The bearer's soul is intangible to all and cannot be interacted with without their express permission. I take the time to blink away my astonishment before allowing the manic laughter to erupt. Fuck you, death. My hallows are better. Chapter 245. Just a quick trip south. General POV. Far away from a certain cackling elf across the Gerald Mountains that separated Skyrim from Cyrodiil, and many a moon before he blessed the world with his newest creation, his 2 apprentices found themselves once again questioning their life choices. A tall Altmer wearing light armor that could be mistaken for fancy clothing, a slightly glowing lute on his back and an old blade in his hand, followed after a heavily armored Nord woman with slightly pointed ears, her eyes narrowed in a mix of determination and frustration. "Can you tell me again why we are drudging through yet another cave?" Marco asked sourly, but didn't stop following his companion. "I thought we came to Cyrodiil for some family secret of yours, instead of, hunting down every group of bandits we come across." Even as he complained, his eyes focused firmly on his surroundings, the ancient blade in his hand held firmly in preparation to respond against any threat that might crop up. "Come on, you wuss. You saw how horrified that old woman was. How could I possibly say no?" Minthara huffed insincerely. Besides, being able to earn an honest pay while on the road is the most basic aspect of adventuring. "Oh, I see how it is." Marco nodded sagely. "You just want to get paid. So much for the great heroine sent forth by the gods." "What? That's not—" she stutters indignantly. "We ran out of the fancy rations yesterday." Marco deadpans, hiding his own frustration. "It really isn't that hard to figure out." The Nord looks away, hiding her embarrassment. "It's not my fault that Raven refused to let us eat anything that wasn't worthy of a noble's table while we were in Winterhold. My taste buds are forever ruined." "Not like having a refined taste is a bad thing." The elf shrugs. "Just don't see the reason you feel the need to hide the fact that you are in fact doing this for money." "Maybe I just want to feel good about it." She rolls her eyes and adds mockingly, "Besides, I don't hear you complaining, Mr. Oh, this jerky is too tough." "Never pretended otherwise," Marco shamelessly surrenders. "Of course," Minthara grouses. Well, what do we have here?" The mildly unsettling voice of an older man echoes throughout the cave, the two adventurers immediately moving into a defensive posture as lightly armored figures emerge from many of the hidden crevices of the cave. "Two little brats on a walk?" The presumed leader of the bandits asks mockingly, his toothless grin making him look almost comical. "Or are you here to offer tribute?" A couple of the bandits chuckle maliciously. "I am afraid not, my good man." Marco offers him a charming smile, immediately catching the attention of all the bandits with his well-trained voice and posture. "For you see, your pillaging ways have brought all kinds of attention to your head, and we, gracious in victory as we are, offer you the chance to surrender peacefully." "Gracious?" The bandit boss tilts his head, testing the word a couple more times. "You some kind of fancy noble or something?" "Close enough." Marco nods smugly. "Tell you what." The boss points at him. "Leave the bitch here and you can leave. I don't need no trouble with nobles." A good half of the bandits make noises that would most assuredly not be acceptable in polite company, one of them even describing what he was going to do. In great detail. Wordlessly, Minthara starts twirling her hammer, her expression the image of good cheer. "Terribly sorry to say this, my good man, but I am afraid I cannot do that." Marco shakes his head sadly. Whoosh. "I am a prideful elf, and leaving my fellow to your no doubt great company sits ill with me." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. "And besides," Marco smirks, "I'd have to survive the attempt in the first place." Boss?" One of the nearby henchmen taps the man's shoulder. "I think we might want to move right about now." Whoosh. "Nonsense," the bandit leader scoffs. "The brats are just being is as far as he gets before a flying warhammer passes through his head, showering everything around him with red and without slowing down slamming into the wall behind him, cracking it and causing the whole cave to shudder. "Now then," Minthara cracked her knuckles, the sound being so loud and unsettling some of the bandits flinched backward. "Which one of you said they were going to make me squeal?" No one answered. "No one?" she asks with a raised eyebrow. "I guess I will just have to make sure then." Many of the unfortunately slow-minded reprobates did not catch her meaning immediately, but that was quickly changed as her hands glowed green and blades of wind started flying all across the cave, and then the screaming started. Her elven companion simply sat down and started playing a tune, attempting to attune it to the pained howling like a complete maniac. "Oh, thank you so much." The old woman grasped Minthara's hands within her own and then quickly moved on to Marco. "Finally, we won't have to worry about those monsters." "Right." The elf scratched the back of his head. "You mentioned a reward." The old woman looked away for a moment. "Ah, yes, about that." One very awkward conversation later. 13 people dead. For a bag of potatoes. Minthara stared at the rapidly retreating woman while breathing heavily. Her head snapped sideways when a hand landed on her shoulder. Come now, Minthara, don't shout the farmhouse apart. We don't need that kind of attention. Just one whisper and the little shit will learn her place, Minthara mumbles to herself, though loudly enough for Marco to hear her. Look at the bright side. Marco attempts to draw her attention while holding down his panic. The bandits had a couple of gems. That ought to make the trip worthwhile, right? She narrows her eyes at him, said eyes notably looking a bit more reptilian than what is usually humanly possible, before she takes a very deep breath and exhales, the tension leaving her. Whatever, not like robbing a poor farmhouse would do us much better. See? I knew you would see reason. Marco claps his hands and then immediately flinches when Minthara narrows her eyes at him. He raises his hands placatingly. What I meant to say is, I am sure our next job will pay far better. Yes, exactly that. She stares at him for a while longer. You better be right. He nods rapidly and only relaxes when Minthara starts walking toward the road. He follows not long after, mumbling to himself about the unfairness of the world, but not daring to mention the fact that she was the one who found the job in the first place. Oh no, he liked his life far too much for that. Besides, what were the chances that their next job would be as bad as this one? A couple days later, fucking run! Marco most assuredly did not shriek like a little girl as a bolt of lightning sheared the ancient Aeoliad wall just next to his head, the thousands of years-old reliefs visibly disappearing before his eyes. Gods damn it, Marco, you said the tomb was supposed to be empty. Minthara growls as she too runs after him, triggering traps and dodging them with almost every step. How in oblivion was I supposed to know there was another tomb below the original? And since when do the bloody Aeoliad have leeches? He yells back in frustration. Everyone has them, you idiot! She yells back, narrowly dodging a trap and blocking another massive bolt of lightning with her magic at the same time. Biting down a retort, Marco cuts down a pair of zombies and ducks behind a pillar, allowing himself a peek at their enemy. He quickly jerks back as a spike of ice barely misses his eye. Well, excuse me for not spending every waking moment of my life training and reading. I like to live, you know. Now is not the time, Minthara growls and smashes her hammer into the pillar on her side of the chamber, making it fall on the lich and destroy the creature. The chamber grows quiet, and Marco can't help but quip. See, I told you it would be easy. The dry look his companion gave him was enough to make him stagger. And then two more liches barged into the chamber. Eye twitching and right hand shaking in pure rage, Minthara growled, "You know what? Fuck this," and took a deep breath. Oh no. Marco gulped, but it was already too late. Fuzz! 3 days later. I am not paying you. The archaeologist looks at them with pure contempt and disgust. You can't do that. Marco points at him furiously, his clothes still covered in stone dust, making him look like a beggar. You told us yourself that the ruins were supposed to be emptied out. And yet you destroyed them like complete amateurs. The old practically spits out, I sent you in there to find out if any bandits or goblins were squatting, not to excavate the entire thing by being idiots. There were 6 gods-damned leeches in there, Marco shrieks. Then how are you alive? The archaeologist looks down at them condescendingly. If you want to make a lie, at least make it somewhat bella, ugh. A fist connects with his face, and he falls as if his strings were cut. Wordlessly, Minthara takes the man's purse and starts walking off. Marco groans. We are so going to get into trouble for doing that. He is just some nobody with more money than sense. Minthara shrugs, and I went easy on him. No one will bother chasing us down for him. Marco groans harder. You just had to say it. She gives him a puzzled look. What? A couple of hours later. Stop right there, criminal scum. A guard points his sword at them. Nobody breaks the law on my watch. Oh, Minthara mutters as she sees the archaeologist surrounded by both legionaries and Bruma guardsmen and pointing straight at them with hate and fury in his eyes. God's fucking damn it! Marco practically cries as they are forced to run. 4 months later, Bruma. Finally, Minthara exhales tiredly as she practically smashes the rotting doorway out of her way and enters her ancestral home. and regrets it immediately as a tangible wave of dust is kicked up. Waving his hand around in an attempt to not choke on the very air, Marco follows after her. "You know, I thought we were done after we finally managed to pay off the Count of Bruma for punching his uncle, but then bam, orcish raid," he says sarcastically, his expression so dead and tired he looked at least a century older. "Don't forget the Minotaur attacks." Minthara grouses, her hands already searching every nook and cranny she could find, though she fails to stop the unbidden shudder at the memory. They were armed with proper weapons. Why couldn't they at least wear a sash? Even Marco blanches at that one. What a way to ruin a man's confidence. He looks into the distance wistfully. They turn silent as Minthara continues rummaging through her ancestral holding. The ancient house was so well hidden in the poorer parts of the city, it somehow avoided anyone finding it for an entire century, resulting in a very thick covering of dust. So thick, in fact, that it almost reminded them of the Skyrim snowfall, if only far more filthy. The moment the connection was made, Minthara's Nordic instincts kicked in, and she observed the entire room with far more attention, quickly finding a busted wall in one of the deepest corners of the house, and pushing through it with barely any effort. The rotten wooden stairs creaked ominously as they descended into the basement, their path ending in a tiny room barely large enough to fit 5 people standing. The room was completely empty, save for a small iron plaque hanging off a wall. With great care, Minthara picked the plaque up and cleaned it up with air magic, revealing a carving reminiscent of a map, and a small inscription below it, no doubt made with magic. "My proud descendant, you who seeks the key to both past and future, follow the path to the temple dedicated to the ruler of the clouds, and all shall be revealed." Minthara reads aloud. She stares at the plaque for a silent moment before both her eye and hand starts twitching violently, the tiny slab of iron denting slightly from the force, and then like a dam bursting, both of the adventurers start cursing like sailors. They were nowhere near done. Chapter 246, Side Quest 3, Cloud Ruler. Another 2 months later, Minthara's POV. The thick forest finally parts as we emerge onto a rocky clearing, the crisp mountain air bringing an immediate smile to my face as I was reminded of my true home. I couldn't wait to get back to Skyrim. Even if my family was supposedly from Bruma, the place just made me all kinds of uncomfortable. My reminiscing is swiftly cut short as my eyes land on a ruined structure, the architecture of which looked so odd and foreign that the uneducated would think it some kind of alien remnant. I immediately recognized it as Akaviri, which most likely meant blades. "Would you look at that?" The grouchy voice of Marco reaches me from behind, his shoulders slumped from the constant climbing and his eyes too tired for his usual cheer. The map didn't send us down a cliff for once. Part of me really wanted to defend whichever ancestor left the clue for us to follow. I really did. But after going through so many ever-increasingly ridiculous obstacles under its guidance, all I could do was not curse them aloud. Still did it in my head, though. "I think we are finally there," I say hopefully, and the feeling that led me to travel to Cyrodiil seemed to agree. It was an odd thing, letting myself just get pulled around by mere vagaries, but a deeper instinctual part of me understood that it had to be done. "Like the last 5 places we've been to?" Marco asks mockingly. He was growing more frustrated with our quest by the day and has long since stopped caring about my glares. "Who knows, maybe he will one spine, one can only hope." I am certain this time. I still narrow my eyes at him and palm the now thoroughly dented iron slab tied to my belt. The inscription mentioned a temple, and this looks very much like one. Or, he raises his index finger dramatically, it could be the residence of a local half-snake vampire. Didn't think about that one, now did you? "There are no Saishi left in Tamriel," I deadpan. "None that we know of. And remember, vampire?" The elven Ponce points out helpfully. I exhale slowly. "Fine, you damned child. There might be one, but that was not the point. I am actually certain this time." He suddenly turns serious. "The feeling?" he asks. I nod and start walking up toward the dilapidated Fort Chok temple structure. It feels like whatever I was looking for is inside. "You never did explain that to me," Marco says curiously as he follows me. What exactly do you feel? A guiding hand, unerring certainty, a decision already made. I list off and blink in surprise. You doing all right there? His concerned question shakes me awake. I shake my head. It is nothing, I was never able to actually describe it before now. His face brightens, though something tells me he just wanted all this to be over and done with, instead of actually being happy for my search. That has to mean something, right? Yes, I deadpan once again, that I am actually certain this time. He chuckles and raises his hands in mock surrender. But of course, who am I to question the divine providence that guides you? I am only here to get song material after all. Won't become the most renowned bard without proper inspiration. How is that going for you, by the way? I ask as we start ascending the half-crumbled stone stairs, the old grey brick gatehouse still standing strong to its sides. As well as it can. He sighs tiredly, his shoulders slumping slightly. We've been running around so much that I got much more practice in fighting people instead of singing about them. Honestly, at this rate, I will never get anything done. Well, that is not going to pass. You usually only whine about doing actual work. This is the first time you complained about bard stuff. Bard stuff. He snorts and shakes his head. I guess I've just not been having much success, and it finally struck me. I can write a nice rhyme whenever I want. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't feel I will ever be able to get that real masterpiece, you know? I turn and give him what some would describe as a creepy smile. I am sure that you will have all the inspiration you need once we manage to defeat the World Eater. He immediately flinches and groans, grasping at his hair. Why did you have to remind me of that? I am too young to get grey hair. If I have to remember it every day, then so do you, I reply in a sing-song voice. Our conversation trails off as we emerge onto the temple's main courtyard, the air turning slightly ominous. I notice numerous fallen skeletons armored in what I believe is blades armor. Their eponymous swords discarded to their sides like so much trash and left to rust as their wielders rot. The temple itself looked far worse than merely half-ruined, as signs of fireball damage appeared all over its surface, with some kind of grander spell having destroyed the uppermost tower. No doubt a Thalmor attack at the end of the war, but what were they looking for here? I turn to Marco, only to see him mumbling a prayer to RK, to which I leave him. I close my eyes and feel a tugging sensation almost dragging me toward a certain buried part of the temple. Wordlessly, I start walking toward it, completely ignoring Marco's demands to wait up. The air turns from ominous to solemn as I pass the ravaged halls of the once glorious temple, many of the side rooms completely caved in by the destroyed roof, leaving me with only a singular path to follow deeper inside. I do not count the passages as I pass them by, completely uncaring for traps, as something told me that there would be none. Things turn into a blur, until finally I emerge into an almost fully intact chamber filled with enshrined swords. A stone dais laying on the other end of it. The moment I stepped inside, apparitions wielding those same blades and wearing their signature armor stepped out of the shrines. Yet my eyes immediately fell upon a far taller feminine figure who stood on the other end of the room and radiated a sense of familiarity. Whoa, I hear Marco quietly mumble, but I barely pay him any attention. No, most of my focus is held firmly by the ice-blue eyes of the apparition standing in front of me. Have you finally come to claim your destiny? Yes. The answer comes to me instantly. Very well, the figure raises her sword, then prove your worth. Do not interfere, I tell my companion, and raise my hammer. We stare at each other for only a moment longer before both of us attack the other in a blur of motion, the other blades merely watching us intently and with a reverence that was not there before. A rapid slash barely goes over my head as I duck and deliver a thrust with the pointed tip of my weapon, only to get evaded and leave me overextended. I quickly raise my left hand and launch a gust of wind, hoping to crush the apparition against the wall, only for it to raise its own hand and dispel the magic a moment later. Almost as if a signal was given, both of us activate alteration magic, both protecting and enhancing our might and reflexes, and immediately burst into another flurry of attacks. Parry for parry, feint for feint, spell for spell. Whenever I attempt to bring something new to the battle, it is met with exactly equal force and power. my frustration growing with each exchange and my blood boiling at the insult. But I was taught to resist lashing out and instead focus my fury into my strikes. Almost pointlessly, I continue fighting on, realizing ever more clearly that I could have been cut down at any point if my opponent had not been holding back, and that was enough to turn my blood from merely boiling into outright searing rage. Yet still I held my focus, and a quick, if simple, plan formed. If I could not beat her with anything she already had, I would use something only I possessed. Allowing myself to be pushed back, I jump away to create distance and without hesitation shout, "Fuss row!" Blowing the apparition back, and to my throat's great protest, I add, "Wuldna!" forcing myself to dash across the room faster than most magic would allow and spearing her onto the ground. She was still not done, obviously, so with one final exertion I breathed in once more, my throat screaming for me to stop, but I pushed on anyway. "Yol Torshal!" I kept the shout going for as long as possible before staggering back away from the blackened wall, the apparition nowhere in sight. Well done. I felt something caress my cheek lovingly, but that must have just been the battle nerves. I do not know how long I was stuck just breathing as deeply as my lungs would allow, but I was soon shaken awake by Marco offering me the last bottle of our most powerful regeneration potion. I drank it all without hesitation and immediately felt my eyes clear and my throat no longer trying to rip itself apart. As my sight cleared, I was met with an unbelievable scene. All of the other blades bowed before me, their ghostly eyes radiating reverence and loyalty, and the nearest of them looking expectantly upon the now tangible sword of my challenger. Understanding the message, I carefully picked it up, and the moment I did, all of the apparitions dematerialized and were seemingly sucked into the blade, the words Ulrika's Oath Blade glowing majestically upon it. Apparently, I had said that out loud as Marco gasped the moment he heard me. "Did you just say Ulrika?" He asks excitedly. "Yes, why?" I blink. "There is only one Ulrika who was a member of the Blades, Minthara. Everyone knows this." He explains patiently, his eyes practically gleaming in anticipation. It clicks almost immediately. "The champion of Cyrodiil." "Exactly," he nods, "and you just defeated her in combat." "No, I did not." I shake my head. My pride would sting far worse if I tried to take the credit for something I did not achieve. I don't doubt for a second I would have died if she was actually trying to kill me. "Truly?" Marco blinks. "That is both scary and amazing." "Quite," I say dryly. "You can admire history later. We need to figure out what we came here for." The moment I say that, I feel a slight prick on the hand holding the sword and look down just in time to see a drop of blood fall on the stone dais. For a moment I feared some kind of trap, my heart racing as I realized that both of us were too deep inside to get out in time. But as the droplet fell, all I felt was a slight shudder, and looked up to see the stone wall before the dais lower and reveal a passage deeper in. Once more I feel the odd drawer beckoning me forward, and I step into the darkness, magical torches coming alight with each step I took. The passage led us to a large room, somehow completely devoid of dust, and all of it looking as pristine as if it was built yesterday. A small leather-bound book lay atop the central table, immediately catching my eyes. Without hesitation, I took a seat on a nearby bed and cracked it open, and immediately squinted as my eyes were met with a tiny script, written with crumbling charcoal. 27th of last seed. 3E433. I finally managed to get out of those damned sewers. How in all the gods' names he expected me to protect the amulet, I have no idea. The old fool was probably riddled with potions of all kinds by the time he reached me, so the fumes must have gotten to him. Still, it was a man's last request. No matter how much of a ponce he was, so off to the chapel I go. "A diary," I mutter, and quickly turn the next page. The handwriting was much improved, no doubt due to a less stressful situation, but it was still written with some frustration. 29th of last seed, 3E433. What kind of idiot leaves such an important item inside a god's damned wooden box? The page goes on to describe in gratuitous detail what the booklet's owner would do to someone named Joffrey. "Wait a moment," Marco voices as he peers down from my side. This must be Ulrika's diary." And just like that, I am completely absorbed by it. flipping page after page and uncaring for the time. Hours pass as I read through the pages containing both victory and triumph, determination and horror. The further in I go, the more convoluted the story becomes, with almost all of the Daedra being involved in one manner or another, and an incarnation of Pelinal being mentioned. Hunting down the Dark Brotherhood nearly to the last man, slaughtering a village of goblins, banishing Manimarco, the triumph at Bruma, and finally the mantling of Akatosh and the humbling of Mehrunes. Finally, I reach the most recent pages, written far less frequently, but I swiftly managed to piece together that there was something going on between the champion and the last septim, something which ended up continuing the imperial bloodline. I go now to face the machinations of the vile Lord of Madness. No one else but I can do so after all. Forgive me, my child, that I will not be able to see you grow up and be happy. I flip to the last page and my eyes widen at what I see, and to you, my descendant with hair of fire and soul of a dragon who visits my visions, the world is cruel to demand more from our family, crueler even to once again place the world upon our shoulders. To you I leave what has always belonged to you, may it serve you as it did your ancestors. With a flash the book disappears, leaving behind a metallic necklace that looked like a simple if a bit oversized silver ornament, with a large diamond-shaped hole in its center. Chapter 247, Side Quest 3, Finale. A Fateful Meeting. The moment I touched the amulet, the feeling that had been pulling me here reached a crescendo, the sheer certainty I felt within myself, blinding all of my other senses, only to disappear completely as I felt what I can only describe as a click within my soul, signaling the end of a soul-binding ritual. And I knew then and there that my fate was sealed, for good or ill. The amulet disappeared for a split second before reappearing around my neck, hanging snugly just above the amulet of Mirkul Gaudursson, a sense of confidence and assurance flowing out of it and toward my heart. The snapping of fingers brought me out of my thoughts as my eyes focused on a very confused Altmer, staring at me with an odd mix of exasperation and awe. Unable to control his curiosity, he points at the amulet and whispers, "By all the gods, is that?" I nod, yes. And that was all that needed to be said, for no one of worth would be unable to recognize the Amulet of Kings. It seems to be missing a bit, Marco points out carefully. The Chim El Adabal was shattered, yes. I nod again, and what an absolutely frightening realization it was that it was done by my own ancestor, Martin Septim, but I feel that finding the frame was merely the first step to all this. So, Marco scratches the back of his head. What do I call you now? Your Highness? Your Imperial Majesty? He pretends to be nervous, but I notice the glint of amusement in his eyes. I huff. An empress is nothing without an empire, and besides, just having the bloodline does not mean I immediately get to sit on the throne. You don't merely have the bloodline. He points at me childishly. You are an actual dragonborn, divine right to rule and all. And I am sure the masses will trample over each other to bow before me, I drawl, causing him to let out an amused snort at the image. And even if I wanted to rule, we have more important things to worry about. He fails to suppress a wince at that, ah yes, can't have an empire if it gets eaten by an angry god. Something has been bothering me ever since we left Skyrim, I mutter after a brief silence. Just before we left, Raven called me and I quote, Miss Earlybeard. Marco looks up and exclaims, Hjalti Earlybeard, as in Tiber Septim. Do you think he knew? Obviously, I roll my eyes. Why else would he call me that? To fuck with you? He snips, and we both let out a snort at that. That was no doubt one of the reasons. I agree with some amusement, but something tells me he knew all along, much like he knew about me being dragonborn. But how? Marco asks. How would he ever know that? I would say it was the Elder Scroll, but that can't be it since he found me before that. I trail off. He did get very good at being a seer after that, but do you think he was able to do it even before? What, like some kind of spontaneous vision due to his heritage? He asks, prompting a nod. I guess he could have seen something and wanted to make sure you had the best chance possible. Even if he can be a bit of an asshole, he is a good person, and probably wants to stop the end of the world just as much as you do. Probably more. I sigh, remembering his constant preparations. It still makes me uneasy that he knows so much and I don't. He said it himself. Marco points out, if he just dropped it all on your shoulders before you were ready, you would have simply crumbled under the pressure. I would not, I retort almost on instinct, but immediately stop as I see Marco raising his hands placatingly. I don't mean you as you are now. He patiently explains, I mean the you he found in the sprawl. The hopeless thief who just found out the world was far bigger than she originally believed. I slowly exhale and let my frustration deflate. Yeah, I guess you are right there. A moment later, a grin spreads on my face. Now that he no longer has that excuse, I am so going to interrogate him when we return. Good luck with that one. I will be safely a city away while the two of you talk. Marco chuckles. And speaking of our dreadful dark overlord, don't you think it is odd how he seems to behave both young and old at the same time? The question gives me pause and I mutter, he has been dealing with all of this for far longer than we were. Marco sucks in a bit of air. Damn, no wonder he can be so unhinged at times. Speaking about it won't give us any answers right now. I sigh and slowly get up. Let's search the place and get moving. Skyrim is over a month away on foot, and we better start early. In the end, we did not get moving for an entire day. The temple held far too much history and artifacts for the Thalmor to have taken it all. So after searching through the entire thing and finding anything from old equipment to ancient texts to even a shrine to Talos, we simply decided to camp out in the ruins, relying on the fact that it was well hidden to get a good night's rest. Which did not say much, as I was unable to get even a little sleep. The earlier revelations left me with too many questions, and my mind would not rest for even a moment as I pondered at my fate and the chain of events that brought me here. The biggest question being, why me? What made me so different from others that made Akatosh choose me specifically? Was this some kind of divine test? Or was I simply destined to this fate from the moment of my birth? Did I ever have a choice in anything to begin with? New doubts kept popping up with each half-baked answer I came up, and I felt disgusted that I was wasting time feeling sorry for myself. So instead of moping like a child, I decided to seek inspiration from the one who went through something similar and spent the rest of the night reading Ulrika's journal, which was somehow stored in the amulet itself. I sought to find some hidden meaning, a magical spell that would make all the doubts go away, something to avoid the issue instead of facing it. All I found was trials, tribulations, and suffering, and standing against it all was simple determination, spite, and stubbornness. And in the end, that is all it boiled down to. I could mope, or I could get to work, and I would never allow myself to be called lazy. It took us 4 days to descend the mountain, and another to leave the forest, the entire trip passing peacefully, almost as if the world itself was offering respite for a past trial, letting us gather our bearings and prepare ourselves for the path ahead. That thought disappeared the moment we stepped onto the clearing around the imperial road that led to Kolovia. A majestic crimson tent, marked with the emblem of the Empire, stood erect, surrounded by a small camp, manned by dozens of cloaked figures, half of them immediately focusing on the two of us, while the rest remained relaxed. Something told me that simply walking away wouldn't work. And so, with a heavy sigh, I started walking toward the encampment, the frustrated grumbling and cursing of Marco following me the entire way there. As we approached, I got a better look at the cloaked men and nearly came to a stop. Under their cloaks, I could see masterfully crafted armor of reddish-brown, accented with gold. The Penitus Oculatus, my lessons on politics supplied, Minthara Dragonbane and Marco of Solitude, a tall imperial firmly asks as I come near. There is no way my title has spread all the way here, so they sought me specifically. Yes. I nod tersely. Attempting to lie here would probably be worse than simply stating our business. The man nods, and then to my shock proceeds to offer a slight bow. Please enter the tent. You are expected. You may keep your weapons. I stare at him in complete confusion for a moment, and all he does is smile patiently. Marco clears his throat. Maybe we should? He points toward the tent. Hiding a slight blush, I offer a quick apology to the amused soldier and get moving. As we pass, many of the legionaries offer us respectful nods, but none of them say a thing, an odd sense of anticipation filling the air. The moment we step into the tent, all outside, noise disappears, replaced by a cozy atmosphere indicating some form of comfort enchantment. A bald old man sitting at an elaborate table points to a pair of chairs. "Sit, if you please." His voice is polite, but carries a lifetime of experience of someone used to holding supreme authority, and both of us obey without even thinking. The man finishes scribbling down a letter and folds it neatly, pressing a golden seal onto the warm wax and moving it to the side. "You and I have much to discuss, Lady Septim." The eyes of Emperor Titus Mede II twinkle with amusement as he looks straight at me. My eyes snap to one of the unfolded letters on the table, the emblem of the three-eyed beetle with a blade under it marked in a very familiar purple, sitting proudly at its end. "Gods damn it, Raven!" I curse mentally. Raven's POV. I narrow my eyes and look toward the southwest. Did someone proclaim their undying love for me again? I mutter, "Nah, Pops, that was just your ego." Scorch chirps. "Ah, of course." I nod imperiously and turn to Serana. "Everything ready on your end?" She pats herself down and mentally searches her Oblivion storage before nodding, checked 3 times over. "Capital," I clap my hands. "Davos?" The Falmer and Moth Priest have already moved out. He informs me, "I've had Carsus up the recruitment drive and we've raised security wherever we could. Unless we get a dragon on our asses, we will be fine." "Don't jinx it," I point at him and he pales slightly. "What of the Dawn Guard?" "Isran has already started multiple raids on known Volkihar lairs." Davos shrugs. "Won't do much, but it will serve well enough as a distraction." "Which is the entire point," I deadpan, to which he simply shrugs once again. "Shouldn't we get moving?" Serana interjects. "I don't want my father catching wind of this." "Very well then." I nod and clap my hands. "Let us go get us a scroll." "And my mother," Serana deadpans. Yes, of course. The scroll and the scary vampire lady." I roll my eyes, grab her shoulder and magically yank us to solitude. Chapter 248, The Volkihar Heist. "There it is, home sweet home," Serana voices blandly, "bigger than I expected." I note idly as I observe the dozens of tall towers, many of them in ruins, looming over a veritable fortress island, and also far more disgusting, I add with a mildly offended sniff. Quickly catching my meaning, she asks, "How so?" I cup my chin and narrow my eyes, think of somehow turning unbridled cruelty and decadence into a color and have it virtually bursting from atop the entire structure. And that was the best way I could put what I was seeing into words. The aura of the place was genuinely disgusting to look upon, the echoes of everyone ever tormented within scraping at the edge of my senses. Honestly, if not for my strength and experience, I'd be scared shitless right about now. "Oh," Serana cringes lightly, but I tap her shoulder and draw her attention before she can go down that particular thought spiral. "No point thinking about it now, we are here to stop it after all." She exhales slowly and nods. Yes, we are." "Speaking of, how do you plan to sneak us in?" I ask the important question. She looks around for a moment before noticing something. There is an old enchanted boat here that can only be used by someone from the castle. They don't usually check on it, as most either stay in the castle permanently or use magic to leave. "But there is a detection system, no?" I ask firmly. She thinks for a moment and nods. "Yes, but you assured me that that would not be a problem." Merely making sure, I assure her and summon my new shroud, barely even feeling it as the powerful artifact covers me in its nearly imperceptible entirety. With a satisfied smile, I point my hand toward the rickety boat. "Lead the way, my lady." The revolting aura became all that much stronger as we passed the threshold of the mist surrounding the castle. A part of me wanted to just turn my perception down to a minimum, but that would make me far more vulnerable and was definitely not worth doing in the name of mere comfort. Our offensively low-class transport floated next to the small dock with nary a sound, and upon reaching a certain point simply stopped, moving back toward the mainland shore the moment we stepped off. My eyes immediately narrowed as I noticed the dozen or so gargoyle statues hanging off a nearby lookout tower. How charming. You can sightsee when we are not in the open. Serana hisses and tugs my arm and quickly leads us to an outcropping of rock to the castle's west, letting out a sigh of relief as we finally find some cover. I take a thorough peek around our position and point my thumb toward a stone structure connected to the sea. That the supply entrance you mentioned? Yes, it has been out of use for some time, so there shouldn't be that many guards there. Right, anything I should avoid? Try avoiding any flashier spells. She decides after a moment, there is no guarantee that they will get us spotted, but we best err on the side of caution. I try not to pout and fail utterly, earning myself an exasperated stare from the vampire lady. Fine, I sigh, no blowing the castle half to bits. You can do that once we are ready to leave, she permits with some amusement. You couldn't stop me, even if you tried. I smirk and flick the ebony blade into my hand. But first, we need to actually get in. The stone supply dock was watched over by a pair of short walls carved into the side of the cave that housed it. Some thrall archers and a pair of very bored vampires stood watch, or at least pretended to, as not one of them expected an actual attack in this God's forsaken place. With a simple application of telekinesis, I quickly scaled the southern wall without making a single sound, appearing behind one of the thralls and slitting his throat before he could even panic. 3 more fell before I was spotted, a slightly misaligned stab leading into one of the thralls screaming out in pain. But it was far too late for the vampire's mortal servants, as I was already right next to them before they could even draw their bows. My dagger sucking out their life force so quickly, a couple of them were partially turned into dust before I could pull the strike back. One of the vampires attempted to use the death of his servants as a distraction and jump me from behind, but without even turning around, I summoned a group of my shades and had a trio of them block the heavy overhead sword swipe together, while another group held him in place for but a brief moment. More than enough time for me to flick my free hand toward him and summon blasphemy, killing him in an instant. Casting my gaze to the other side of the wall, I could see that Serana was no less successful, as the entirety of the wall was covered in fine chunks of flesh, and she was just about done draining the other vampire to their true death. Without pausing, we enter the lower castle, the numerous undead hounds within ignoring us completely as they saw Serana as one of their masters and were unable to detect me at all. As we stalked through the mostly empty corridors, a terrible smell assaulted our senses, the light clanking of bone quickly reminding me of what we were about to find. As we passed another empty corner, we were greeted by a large chamber filled to the brim with a veritable mountain still bloody bones, traces of yet undevoured flesh being quickly stripped off said bone by a group of feral vampires, many of them not even bothering with clothes and looking more like humanoid bats than actual people. I shared a disgusted look with Serana before channeling all my burgeoning fury into an illusion spell and directing it toward the ferals, which turned out to be overkill as it took only the slightest nudge for the mindless beasts to fall upon each other over their competition for food. Only one survived the ensuing slaughter, and I rid the world of its filth with a silent blade of wind, severing the vile creature in twain. We remained silent as we ascended further, only speaking when Serana instructed me on how best to avoid certain traps and which paths to follow. I took great pleasure in ending whichever creature had the audacity to stand in our path after what I had seen, though I still made sure not a sound was made. After close to an hour of trudging through Harkon's rotten halls, I finally felt the smell of fresh air, and as Serana pulled yet another hidden chain and the thin stone wall before us lowered to reveal a beautiful, if somewhat overgrown garden, the smell of the no doubt highly poisonous flowers removing the stench of flesh and rot almost entirely. I took a deep, liberating breath, absent-mindedly noting that my anti-poison ring was activated when I did so, and then, with a serene smile, started cursing all possible generations of Harkon's family. A good minute of the vilest insults on both Nirn and Earth. Later, a very amused Serana asked, "Are you quite finished?" "Yes, thank you." I nod and smile serenely, like I didn't just offend her entire family line. A moment later, the smile was replaced with a deep frown. I knew the place was going to suck, but not to this extent. She looks away, hiding a slight wince. It never got this bad before. I give her a deadpan look. Any level of it is just as bad. Don't try and defend it. I wasn't going to. She huffs, mildly annoyed. Well, excuse me, princess. I let some of my disgust leak into my voice. I just didn't expect that even a monster such as Harkon would just make a charnel house under his own home. You'd think a noble would have some standards, but no, let us just behave like complete and utter beasts. Because fuck principles. I scoff. So much for the proud Volkihar. She palms her face and sighs. I do not disagree, but are you quite done venting yet? We do have a job to do. Catching myself, I exhale and allow my frustration to leave me. Yeah, fine. I sense some kind of mechanism under the sundial-looking thing in the center there, so we should start from that. I point at the stone construct jutting out from the middle of the garden. The moon dial, Serana mutters and starts looking it over. My mother made it a project of hers to make something that would show time at night just to see if she could. It ended up being far more complex than we ever expected, but when the garden was still clear and the moonlight fell just right, it made for a beautiful sight. I can picture it, I offer genuinely. Then again, an immortal without a hobby is a dull thing. Very, Serana smiles wryly. Most vampires usually end up as stagnant caricatures, but not my mother. She always found something new to do and still kept up with her earlier projects. Just imagine a garden tended to for centuries by a true master. Her smile turns wistful at the memory. I allow her to reminisce for a brief moment before pointing at the dial. Some parts appear to be missing. You think it was on purpose. It would not surprise me. She sends a quick glance toward the ruined southern entrance. Considering how well she knew my father, she must have expected him to bar any memory of her. I don't think even she expected him to do it quite so literally. Fucking thousands of years old and still throwing tantrums. I snort and wave her on. Come on, those missing pieces won't find themselves. We take our time searching for the missing pieces, mostly as a way to take a break, as we knew that no one was going to go behind Harkon's back and actually check on the garden. And as the sun is slowly replaced by the moons, we slot the circular tablets into their intended spots, and watch with interest as the dial retracts into a circular stairwell leading into yet another passage. I swear to Azura, your mother must have gotten off on the idea of secret passages. I deadpan, and ignoring Serana's indignant glare, step into the darkness once again. Thankfully, the air within is not tainted with 1,000 dead, so I do not feel rushed in my exploration, slowly examining the dusted halls and looting them for all they were worth. I did have to promise Serana that I'd give her most of the value, though. Simply stealing it in front of her was not going to fly, no matter the excuse. We had to slow down somewhat, as she was forced to manually deactivate each and every gargoyle we passed, due to all of them being personalized and carrying her mother's mark. Why did we not simply destroy them? One might ask themselves. Simple, really. Why destroy what you can repurpose? After a slow descent, we began to climb upwards, my sight quickly informing me that we were ascending one of the less damaged towers to the castle's north. The halls became smaller the higher up we got, but far more opulent. With traces of multiple forms of workshops, anything from alchemy to ritualism to carpentry, it could be found up here. And then we stepped into her actual study, and I almost started looting the place then and there, only stopped by Serana's knowing look and threatening smile. Damn you, private property. Chapter 249, Descent into the Cairn. I try and hide my sudden bout of avarice with a cough. It doesn't work, impressive collection. I let out an appreciative whistle as I observe the small library no doubt filled to the brim with all manner of research. I can practically taste Serana's amusement as she smirks. Mother was a very dedicated scholar. Whenever she finished her research on something, she would immediately move on to something completely different. A genuine polymath, eh? I ask with a raised eyebrow. Yes. She nods with a hint of smugness, though it seems finding her is not going to be as simple as I expected. I lazily point at the stone circle in the room's center and deadpan, that is a portal. She looks down and blinks, then looks away, hiding her embarrassment. It would seem so. She could be anywhere then. She adds with a sigh, if she is as meticulous as I believe her to be, she has no doubt left some kind of clue. I mutter leadingly, I don't believe she would simply run off without leaving some kind of contingency for exactly this kind of situation. You know, you can just say you already know what we are looking for without trying to sound mysterious. Serana points out wryly. Ruin all my fun, why don't you? I huff. Fine, we are looking for some kind of journal. That is what I thought. She smirks. And do gather all of her books, if you would be so kind. I don't want Harkon finding them. I narrow my eyes at her for a moment before letting out an amused snort. Keep going, we shall make something out of you yet. She giggles quietly. I don't think I would go quite that far. The world would not be able to handle it. Your mercy is inspiring. I nod sagely and point to one of the bookcases in the corner of the library. That place feels important, so we should start our search there. With a newfound air of levity, we throw ourselves to work. It does not take us long to find Valerica's journal, but as Serana needed to take some time to actually read it, I left her to it while storing all of the books as carefully as I could. When we got Valerica out, I'd just delay giving them back so I could have my people copy everything important down. Sure, she was Serana's mother, but she was at one point, or maybe even still unironically, a Balit. So I had no qualms about stealing from her. I was just about halfway through sorting through the mountain of stored books when I heard Serana quietly gasp. Found something? I call out from across the room. Give me a moment. She starts flipping through a couple pages repeatedly before frowning and walking up to my side of the room. She was researching how to access the Soul Cairn, and something tells me that is exactly where she is hiding. What better place to hide than where none may go, I muse. It was either that or a Daedric realm. That portal is way too complex for anything else. You've heard about it. She looks surprised. I am one of the greatest enchanters alive, and one of my colleagues is both a lich and a master necromancer. I drawl lazily. Of course I've heard of the realm of stolen souls. And you are aware that no living being may enter, she asks pointedly. But I simply wave her off. You let me worry about that. You already have a way to enter without dying, don't you? She asks, somewhat exasperated. I am sure I have no idea what you are talking about, I answer with a wink. Now let us get back to work. That portal won't open itself. She gives me a blank stare before letting out a huff and going back to looking through the journal. Multiple tests and some minor ingredients wasted later. We stood above the tiny metal brazier above the portal, a bunch of very finely ground alchemical components mixed together. Without any prompting from me, Serana pulled out a knife and made a shallow cut in her hand, letting her blood flow over the contained ritual. The moment the first droplet of sanguine crimson fell, the entire room shuddered, a burst of otherworldly cold energy flashing out of the stone circle before the circle itself disassembled and the different stones floated up into the facsimile of a crumbled staircase. The deep purple hole in reality that opened below the floating rocks was almost painful to look at. Well, that doesn't look one bit ominous. I grouse as I light up a cigar. Ready? Serana asks, hiding her own apprehension. Nope. I pop the P and enter the portal. It felt like moving through tar at first. Both my movement and breathing felt so restrained, a small part of me was about to go into a drowning panic. Thankfully, the feeling persisted only for a short while before I felt myself get both shoved and pulled forward, and faster than I could blink. I was standing atop a certain staircase. I moved to the side just in time to stop a disoriented Serana from stumbling down, the vampire offering me a grateful nod as she regained her balance. Here we are. The Soul Cairn. I squint, and what a shit place it is. Grey ash covering most of the land, looking like some kind of macabre, colourless beach, rotten tree-like growths that were closer to stone than actual wood, and above it all a deep, dark blue and purple sky with a swirling energy siphon to top it off. The whole landscape was covered in cracks that seemed to leak soul energy. Buildings of blackened stone brick made to look everything from small grave shrines to mausoleums and even towers jutted the land in a haphazard way. All of it made so much worse by the innumerable souls staring into the distance, their lack of hope tangible in the air. Calling it a mere shithole was understating it, but I didn't have all day to come up with sufficient insult, so it will have to do for now. It feels cold, I hear Serana mutter. I give her a dubious look. Aren't you always cold? Not what I meant, she grumbles. It is a deep, soul-searing cold. Very poetic, I snark. And since you aren't attempting to walk back up, I trust you aren't in immediate danger. No, I would have to stay here for a very long time for it to have any effect. She explains with a shake of her head. Speaking of, how are you not feeling it? Oh, I know it is there. I nod eagerly. I just have multiple layers of protection on me at all times. How responsible. Scorch snarks as I feel him metaphorically glare at the entire place. Something told me he was going to complain a lot if I summoned him here. As if that would stop me. How lucky. The thousands of years-old vampire pouts at that, suppressing a cold shiver all the while. I chuckle and point a thumb at myself. Enchanter, remember. She narrows her eyes. Maybe I should also get into enchanting. It was obviously supposed to sound like a threat of her surpassing me, but unfortunately for her, I was not about petty pride and merely spread my arms welcomingly. By all means. She grumbles something to herself and wordlessly starts descending the stairs. As we pass through what I can only describe as a mockery of some kind of street, the souls all stare at us with sluggish confusion, none of them even capable of growing excited at something in their environment finally changing. And that made me supremely pissed off. Before I could truly consider things, my hands were already moving, blasphemy flicking outwards and carving a set of runes as my sight gave me a full bird's-eye view of the area. What are you doing? Serana asks cautiously. Don't worry about it. I wave her off, sheathing my blade and already planning the next spot along our path. That does not look like something I should ignore, she points out. Don't worry about it. I grind out with narrowed eyes, but sigh as I realize I was being a dick. Sorry about that. I just feel like I need to do something about this disgusting place. It won't get us killed. Probably. She palms her face. Just make sure to tell me if we are about to get noticed. I'd rather have some warning before my soul was ripped away from me. Again. But of course, madam, I mock bow. 'Tis the most basic courtesy to tell someone if they are about to die a horrible death. We share a morbid chuckle and continue following the path, my hand flicking out from time to time as if I was marking the distance of our journey. As we passed a small area of stony shrubbery, I could hear a very distinct voice cursing at something. One shared look later, and we were both heading that way. And as we stepped into the clearing, our eyes were blessed with a most magnificent sight. For there he stood, his voice that of a centurial chain-smoker, his build the most magnificent among the Dunmeri, and his glorious bald head marked with the scars of battle. The captured soul of St. Giab turned its eyes upon us, the glorious wisdom held with eye. Just stoop! Scorch groans as if in pain. Fine, fine. I cackle mentally. You, who are you? Another jealous interloper here to interrupt my work, Jube asks us, hiding his obvious panic behind false bravado. A cruel smile spreads on my face as I introduce myself, Lord Dagoth Thrur. The dead saint screams like a little girl and jumps away, before seemingly realizing that we were in the open and scratching the back of his head. What do you want? Do you know where you are? I answer his question with another. Some kind of prison? Jube shrugs. One moment I was being stared at by a Dremora wielding some kind of funny backrock, and the next I was stuck here. Yeah, I don't know how to tell you this, Jub, but you were murdered and your soul trapped, I tell him solemnly. I can see the hope drain from his semi-ethereal eyes, his desire to just curl up on the spot, turning palpable. But there was still some steel in the slayer of the cliff racers as he forced himself to ask, What do you want, and how do you know my name? I want to offer you a way out of here. I offer sincerely, one of your stature should not wallow down here for all eternity. Ah, so the stories of St. Giab have already spread far and wide, I see. He stands a bit prouder, makes dying in pain and getting my soul ripped away almost worth it. It really isn't, I deadpan. You are a household saint only known to some. His smile cracks a bit, but that lasts only for a moment. None may take away the glory of Jube, not even the servants of the Shamat, he proclaims proudly. Do you want out of here, or no? I ask with a raised eyebrow. His bravado crumbles instantly, and he bows lowly. Yes, please. I flick blasphemy into my hand and touch his form, setting him free from this place. Follow the path behind us. There is a stairwell there that will lead you to Nirn. Your soul should go to the afterlife after you pass through. You have my thanks. He bows even deeper and immediately runs off. Finally done with your adorations? Serana quips, referring to the massive icon of St. Jayab I had in my manor. I shrug. I could save him, so I did. Of course. She tuts at me like I was a child. We continue exploring the cairn, witnessing many despair-inducing scenes of ghosts calling out to someone, of those still begging for their lives, or at least the freedom of their souls, even of a group of ghostly children playing around a spectral campfire. I fucking hate this place, I mutter as yet another rune is placed on the ground. Then we should hurry up and get out as soon as possible. Serana prods, though even her voice is filled with disgust. We step through a gate of blackened stone, our eyes immediately drawn to a massive mausoleum surrounded by bone standing at the center of this part of the cairn, like some kind of hub. It would seem we have found our destination, I note, and start preparing myself for what was to come. Chapter 250, Valerica Volkihar. You think she is in there? Serana asks, both excitement and trepidation dancing in her expression. Yup. I nod with certainty. It wouldn't be sufficiently dramatic otherwise. You do know the world doesn't need to follow the rules of drama, right? It is cute how she is trying to convince herself of that. I turn to her and quirk an eyebrow, saying absolutely nothing. After a brief bout of staring, she huffs and looks away. As we get closer to the massive mausoleum, I suddenly stop walking, just in time for a faintly familiar-looking spirit to dash past me with an ethereal blade raised in her hand. The elaborately robed Altma rounds on me and raises her blade once again, practically frothing at the mouth. I will kill you. As yet another pathetically telegraphed sword swipe passes by me, I flip the ebony blade into my left hand and stab it in the back of her neck, draining away what little vitality or spiritual cohesion she had left. And then, coating my foot in energy, I punted her in her backside, sending the weightless thing flying off into the distance. Sheathing my blade, I regain my relaxed expression and start walking like nothing happened. Friend of yours? Serana asks. Thalmor Justiciar, actually. I correct her without inflection, tried to revive a Falmer colony and send them to raid Skyrim in the thousands. I took exception to that. Still, I got my hands on her basic research into revitalization from her, so at least she was good for something. So no one important then. Exactly, I grin. It doesn't take us long before we reach our destination, no other interruptions being forthcoming, but at the edge of my senses, I could feel the guardians of this place slowly awakening and beginning to react to our intrusion. That was for later Raven to deal with, though. Now I had to pacify a control-freak vampire older than most nations. As we ascended the staircase, I could feel the gaze of something old fall over us, the slightest instance of panic emanating from the same source as it observed Serana. Before we could even finish climbing, Valerica had already run up to the visible barrier, keeping her within her home prison, and was staring at her daughter with both horror and astonishment, completely ignoring my presence for the moment. Serana! The vampiric lady almost choked. What are you doing here? Serana stared at her wordlessly, her thoughts no doubt awhirl with the volatile mixture of things she wanted to say. But in the end, she simply settled on a cold, if hopeful, mother. What are you doing here? Valerica questions, still too surprised to return to the controlling matron I knew her to be. We are here to get you out, and for the scroll. Serana visibly forces herself to remain concise. We are ending Harkon's plans once and for all. What are you talking about? Her mother sounds outright bewildered now. Who put these foolish ideas in your head? I can feel Serana restrain her desire to snarl, but she does narrow her eyes. I have not come here to have you question my reasoning. I have come here to set us both free, permanently. She could have spat on her face, and Valerica would have probably been less furious, but her extensive life experience won out as she forced down whatever heated retort was no doubt at the tip of her tongue. You have no idea what you are talking about. I am no longer here of my own will, and the masters of this place never let a soul escape their grasp. Leave while you still can, she demands stubbornly. Serana slowly palms her face and takes a deep breath of the frigid air. You obviously did not hear me clearly. We are getting you and the scroll out, and that is final, and no amount of misplaced pride will stop us. Valerica looks at her like he has just said the most idiotic thing ever. Even if you manage to free me from this place, and I assure you, you will not, the moment Harkon gets his hands on either one of us, his plans will succeed, and both of us will suffer fates worse than death. So what? Serana outright glares now. We hide for the rest of our lives, run from a shadow that will never leave us, bury ourselves for literal millennia. Why not just kill ourselves and save the world the trouble? Valerica flinches back as if struck. You don't know what you are talking about. I did everything to keep you safe. You buried me alive and left me to rot, Serana snarls. Did it ever even occur to you that I never wished to be part of your and Harkon's power games? Maybe I just wanted to actually live instead of being used as a weapon in your personal petty war. Her daughter's words finally seem to sink as her shoulders slump, and Valerica finally realizes what an absolute twat she is being. It seems I was too blind to realize what we were doing to you. I am sorry. Serana glares at her for a while longer, then visibly deflates and mumbles, I just wanted my family back. Oh, my dear child. Valerica extends her hands toward the barrier, her voice breaking. Seeing as that was pretty much done, I clear my throat loudly. Pardon the interruption, ladies, but we do have work to do. Earning some immediate stink eye from Serana. Valerica rounds on me, all her previous vulnerability gone in an instant. And who are you to meddle in our affairs? The tone is so imperious it would have fit in the white gold tower like a glove. But I was not about that life. To you, wife of a mere disgraced petty king, I am his exalted lordship Dagoth III, Raven the Flame-Tongue, court mage of Skyrim. I can see I hit a nerve there as her countenance becomes slightly more predatory. A mere mortal can hold as many titles as he wishes. It changes nothing. Are you quite sure about that? I ask cheerfully, and flare the full brunt of my magicka, no doubt blinding her with the veritable sun that was my presence and causing her to flinch away. Forgot to add, I am also an archmage. I smile smugly. Once more her posture shifts, this time into a far more personable one. It would have been disturbing if I did not do it on the regular myself. I see, she states simply, but I hear the unsaid, yeah, I see you as a peer now, speak as you wish. Excellent. I clap my hands with false cheer, now that the pecking order has been established. Her eye twitches. We can finally get to work. I see two options before us. Do tell. I can practically feel my smugness scraping against her nerves as she asks. Option 1. I raise a finger. I brute force cut through the barrier and no doubt alert every single ideal master in the area. We grab the scroll and get out before we all die a horrible death. I do hope that option 2 is less suicidal, Valerica says in near deadpan. It is likely the one you are thinking of, and my preferred solution. Serana and I go and disable the trio of hubs currently funneling power into this barrier, and we alert only some of the guardians, giving us more time to both prepare and escape. I see. Valerica pauses. I trust you will keep her safe? I scoff. Your lack of faith in your own progeny is genuinely insulting. The barest hint of a smile twists at the edge of her lips. Very well, I will wait here. Serana shares a quiet goodbye with her mother, and we swiftly depart. Those bones won't rattle themselves after all. The massive club of mammoth bone whooshes over my head as bombard the gigantic construct of bone with solar magic, encasing it in fire and extinguishing the final linchpin on Valerica's prison. I carve a small rune on the tiled floor and sheathe my weapons, allowing myself to finally relax within the veritable sea of blackened bone laying all around me. Soon Serana descended from the towers, having finished off the 20-ish archers that awaited there, a fancy-looking elven bow in her hands. They were far stronger than I remember. I note idly as we start looting the place for all it was worth. Still relatively weak, but I can totally see someone overrunning a town with 100 of these. You fought them before? Serana asks, as she grabs an entire stack of gleaming soul gems. Once, in Meridia's temple. I nod, and seeing her looking at me questioningly, I grin. The one that no longer exists? Yes. Some chucklefuck thought it would be funny to summon a bunch of them using soul sacrifice rituals. They were annoying to deal with in numbers, but fell quickly enough. These, I point to the demolished sea of bonemen, could quite handily defeat a unit of legionaries. We are within their domain. Serana shrugs. It would have been more surprising if they were not stronger here. Fair, I nod. Not like they were even a threat. Anything below a dragon really has no chances of even scratching us at this point. Hint, hint. They don't until they do. She warns, finished with your little carving project. Yup. I get up from my crouching position. We can go and grab your mother now. I feel her staring a hole at my back as I walk away. Somehow I doubt it is going to be that easy, and your mention of a dragon does not inspire confidence. I turn to her with a grin. I have absolutely no idea what you are on about. Your speed is impressive, are the words that greet us as we once more approach Valerica, her prison now completely open. Or maybe your standards are just that low. I jab. She hums non-committedly, follow me, and turns without waiting. A moment later the great doorway opens and we step into the mausoleum. And it was nothing even close to what I remembered or even expected. The entire place looked as pristine as a palace. Every single nook and cranny bore the visible marks of a true master's touch, and while her expression remained unchanged, I could feel Valerica's hidden smugness at my reaction. I am definitely hiring you for interior design when we murder Harkon. I let out an appreciative whistle. Valerica hums once again. I never said I was for hire. This time it is my turn to give her a smug look. Don't make promises you can't keep. Before we can devolve further into our still ongoing dick measuring contest, Serana clears her throat. Scroll, danger, escape. She asks us as if we were idiots. A genuine smile appears on Valerica's face at her daughter's downright lively behavior. It is just in here. She points to an actual suite, masterfully carved into the surface of the thick walls, every possible amenity on display, and every single thing crafted by hand. And there, hanging upon the wall, lay the final piece of the puzzle, the Elder Scroll of the Sun. Serana, if you would, I gesture toward the scroll. She nods, leaving behind a curious Valerica. Skittish around such artifacts? The last time I touched one, I connected directly. I deadpan, I feel it is neither the time nor the place to repeat the experience. How curious, she continues with her reticent act. Got it, Serana calls out. Let us leave then. Valerica is already moving, completely uncaring for all the work she is leaving behind. Before she can make it to the fifth step, I sense something incoming. She rounds on me. What is coming? It is a dragon, isn't it? I can practically feel Serana's desire to strangle me. Valerica directs a confused look toward her daughter, but then grim realization strikes her. Durnavir. She sounds outright horrified now. You must escape, quickly. We are not leaving you behind. Serana outright refuses, her tone that of someone talking to a stubborn child. Foolish girl, if you do not leave, you will die. The panicking mother looks to me, only to see my face twisted into a bloodthirsty grin, and just as a massive, half-rotten green dragon lands at the other end of the mausoleum, I summon the staff of Magnus and blasphemy into my hands, her eyes immediately widening at the weapon's auras. I turn my glowing eyes to her and then to the dragon. Nah, I'd win.